Welcome to the Parts and Labor Podcast, the podcast that explores strategies, systems, and stories that drive salon success. I'm Alicia, founder and CEO of Salon Scale.
And I'm Whitney, head of sales here at Salon Scale. Welcome to the Parts and Labor Podcast. Okay, welcome back to episode 18 of the Parts Plus Labor Podcast. I'm your host, Whitney.
And I'm Alicia.
And today... Should we start that over? Okay, never mind. We're going to keep rolling. We're on a time crunch. So today we're going to talk about the salon climate in Canada. So starting a salon, starting a business really in Canada, and kind of what makes that different from the US. Because if you don't know, we actually live in Canada, and Salon Scale was started right here in Saskatchewan by our good old Saskatchewan girl right there, Alicia.
Good old Canada.
That's
I
right.
love it. Yeah, I think that's a good place to kind of start is building any business in Canada. There is different limitations, different things that are happening, and good perks, and also some things that are harder. And so when I look at starting Salon Scale in Canada, in Saskatchewan, there was some good benefit to it. Like, we were kind of, like I always said, we were like incognito mode. So no one knew where Saskatchewan was. So I could test the product out, do all that stuff, get to market without relatively the rest of the world kind of knowing what was going on, and making sure that the product worked before we went more international. And so that was great. The other one too is our time zone. In Saskatchewan, we're Central Standard Time. And so we could talk, East Coast, West Coast in a day, and it didn't, it worked really well with our schedule. Mm-hmm. So that was another benefit to having starting a tech company, a global company in the province of Saskatchewan, which is probably hard for many people to say. Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Yeah, that's it. But I think, some of those things were there. The other perk too for us was our government really does have a lot of government grants and funds to be able to help support tech companies, to keep the companies in our country. So all of those were really almost like benefits. So here I had this dream, and I had this aha moment, and I figured out how to make the first viable product, and then I start to learn how to go to market. And when I went to the market, then I found out about all these other benefits that could come and help fund it, so that I could hire more people to then grow it internationally. And so all of those things kind of really helped for our benefit when we went into the phase of going to market. But what held a great place in my heart was, it didn't matter if I was talking to salon owners in Canada or the US. Everyone still had the same problem. Mm-hmm. And then when I started to dive in, really, what does Salon Scale do? Salon Scale, it covers your cost of goods, right? It's going to make sure that nothing leaves that back bar not paid for. So this was a big leak. This was the missing puzzle piece in everyone's pricing model. This was the missing problem for profitability in salons. So now we have this method, we have this tool, and then when we look at the two segments, like if we just look at US and we look at Canada, one of them, Canada, specifically, has an even higher deficit. And the reason is because a lot of the goods that come into the country to be able to service customers are coming internationally. So now we have things like inflation, tariffs, we have things like conversion on the dollar. Mm-hmm. And all of that makes our bottom line expenses significantly higher than the US. Mm-hmm. Not to mention even taxes and all that stuff. So we also pay a lot more tax here in the country. And so when I looked at both, and I looked at it, is like, we solved the same problem, but we, for Canadians, can significantly help Canadian salons. We can help them instantly recoup a lot of these kind of costs that are coming to them, and keep track of them, because it inflates at an annual, if not a biannual rate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So many of these companies, and I know there are Canadian manufacturers as well, but many use lines manufactured in the US. And so, you get hit with tariffs, with taxes, with the conversion rate, and that fluctuates. And right now, it's bad. It's not good. It's like 40% more to buy a product in Canada when you convert the dollar. So it matters that much more. But what I noticed too, so going between the States and Canada a lot, there's a 40% difference in the dollar, but a lot of things are seen as kind of like a one-to-one. It's like the wages aren't that much higher. Prices for salon services can't be like 40% higher typically than the US. So you're left with like even smaller margin, because you do kind of think as like a Canadian dollar and a US dollar as more similar than they actually are. And so, yeah, just like you said, you have that more like smaller margin. It's that much more important to make sure that these costs of goods are covered, and that you don't have to continuously switch and look for a cheaper line. You can continue buying the line that you love, that your customers love, just kind of regardless of what that price is. Because when you focus on really separating out and just making sure like the product itself is covered, if you're talking between, $7 a tube versus $10 a tube, well, that's a 3 different price difference to the client. If you're just focused on like, the product cost, I need whatever I paid for it to be paid for. Okay, well, if it's 40% more here in Canada, let's say that's a few dollars different to the client. So that's a really effective way, and making sure like you can still afford the products that you're using, regardless of the tariffs, regardless of the taxes, regardless of their continuous price increases, without having to do this big jump in pricing to the client. Because when you keep it in there, if you're giving commission on the full cost of the service, if the product goes up by $3 for a combination of reasons, if you're giving commission on the full cost of the service, you need to just cover that $3. You need to raise your price by $6. And so this prevents that. So you don't have to do those massive price jumps to clients in order to just cover a rising product cost. It can just be what I paid is what you paid. And that's a really fair, simple, easy way to do it. Because I think there's this misconception a lot of times when you switch to parts plus labor, like that's going to be a huge price increase to the client. Yeah. And usually the first time it will be a price increase, not any more or less than your standard price increase, but typically it's going to be a price increase because you were likely undercharging. But then going forward, the price increase, you don't have to raise your prices because of inflation. If the product goes up by $1, the price of the client goes up by $1. It's not like, okay, I need to make $5 more on every service, so we have to do a $10 price increase, because that part is separate from the commissionable service.
Well, and just exactly that is like what you use on a customer is a cost of goods sold. It costs you this much money to service a customer. It's a cost of goods sold. So the sheer fact, if you're pricing this way, you're putting it all in and you're keeping those together, and I have to like raise this because I have commission, like you're doing this, it essentially it's going to always be an issue. Mm-hmm. Your cost of goods should never be associated in a commissionable earning line. That should be separate, right? So like, we've seen tactics in the past where there's service charges or a fee that kind of gets taken towards these things. And those are kind of like, they cover it a bit, but you don't know, like, mm-hmm. You're not super sure. And then when you finally get it dialed in, you're like, okay, I think that's in. Next year, the product's going to go up, mm-hmm. Or you've added more staff, so you need more product and more inventory, or the other way too, you have staff that left, so now you have less but higher overhead still. So there's a lot of things that have to be factored in, and they have to be separate. Mm-hmm. Things that cost you to operate your business have to stay over here, and then the things that bring you revenue are over here. Commissions get conversations on this side, minus what's happening over here. Mm-hmm. And if you separate those things, that's like the easiest way to stay ahead of this. The other thing I would say too is like our Canadian customers, when we're talking about how you can charge there's the Canadian, yeah, you hear that? Sorry. The best analogy I always have, or the way to really like narrow down the thought, is if you think of like Toronto, right? If you think of downtown Toronto and going to get your hair done, what do you think the base prices are in Toronto versus Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, mm-hmm. right? So when you look at that, why is that so different? Why can you charge $200 for a haircut in Toronto and you can only, most of the time at high end here is $100 a haircut? Like that's $100 swing. But it's cost of living, right? So when you look in, income's higher, usually in those areas, the cost of living's higher, the rent is higher. So where, a salon in Saskatchewan might only be paying, $30,000, $40,000 a year for rent. If you're downtown Toronto, you might be looking at, $200,000 just mm-hmm. to rent your storefront. So, those things kind of factor in those. So when you look at the actual product, like you look at color, you look at any of the back bar coming in. If Toronto can charge $200 and you're charging, capping out at 100 because of your area, but underneath you guys are both paying the exact same for that product's increasing, you can see who has more room to be able to cover those costs. So it's really, I think it's like getting into understanding to really separate these things is the most important, because it gets you out of that mindset where you're not sure that you're covering these things, or you're not on top of that, or protecting your margins. That's what you're doing. And then not to mention, I think that the comment that you had, which was around you're paying commission on those parts, right? So in Canada, if you're paying commission to your stylist 50%, you're paying commission and you include that product in there, you're paying commission on that product. Absolutely you are. But what happens at payroll? So at payroll, you're going to pay CPP, you're going to pay EI, you're going to pay on what their gross earnings are. So if you're inflating the earning because it has the product in there, that means you're also going to be paying more taxes to your staff. And so there's that side. Then you've got your year end, and you got your inventory, and like when you go and report like what your cost of goods are, what you've used, if you're not separating those things out, you're also inflating how much revenue the business brought in. So now you're going to pay, whether it's a LLC or a incorporation or sole proprietorship, you're going to be paying more because you're saying you're bringing in more. So whether you're a solo and you're doing your taxes at the end of the year in Canada, and you're saying, oh yeah, my total amount that I brought in was $57,000. Of the $57,000, how much was product being used? What was cost of goods sold? If you don't separate that, that means you're going to be paying whatever that deduction is. So that is like a huge cost saving already on the tax side. And then same thing for salon owners, you just get double hit. You get the commissions to your staff, which you're inflating their income, you're going to pay tax there. And then at the end of the year, you are also inflating how much the business is bringing in on a revenue side, not separating your cost of goods.
That's something we don't talk about enough. That alone would be huge. I mean, absent of like what it does to your bottom line and the profitability in the salon when you separate it out, but that alone is a massive point that I don't think we ever really talk about or get to. Is you're exactly right. You're including what it costs you to do the service in that revenue, and it's an unreasonable inflation, and that is going to just cost you more tax in the end.
Well, I think 15, 20 years ago, we just weren't doing as many high cost of goods sold services. Like we weren't using as much product. It was still sometimes a cash-based business. Like we just transitioned into this side of things, and then accountants, bookkeepers. No one's fluent in accounting for salons. No one's, unless you specifically find one out, and they're probably not in Saskatchewan. So a lot of the times it's checks and balances, right? And so like whenever a salon, even myself, like I found this is like, whenever I would talk to a lawyer, an accountant, a bookkeeper, I'm like, just get it done. I just don't want to like look at that. Like I just want to move on and just make more, right? I think it's really important that when you feel uncomfortable, it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. If you're uncomfortable, that means there's something that needs to be either learned and or acted upon. But just to simply move on, like you could be losing out on thousands of dollars and lots of potential profit just by not stopping for a second and making sure that these are registered properly. And what you absolutely don't want to do is just hand things over and say, yep, this is how I made, this is this, and like here's all my invoices from every product I purchased for the year. That doesn't cover necessarily what is really going on within the business.
And you said an interesting point earlier too, which I want to touch on, because somebody said this to me on a demo once, and she was in a small town, so kind of what she could charge was capped. You want to compare it with, you don't want to be 10 times as much as every other salon in the town. And she said, I don't get a discount from my manufacturer for being in a small town. These companies aren't giving you a discount because you can't charge as much. So just going back to that point, it's just,
Well, if anything, you're getting charged more. And you also have a thing called shipping.
Yeah.
Like the average salon, I looked at it as paying $250 to $300 a month in shipping because they don't have the cash to front like an entire month worth of supply. So in Canada, most of your supplies, you're going to be shipping them unless you're going to the store every week, which is unlikely. So when you're, ordering the extra set of extensions for $20 or $25 to ship that, like even shipping, like in Canada is extremely expensive.
Oh God, yes.
So like that,
Sure is.
that right there is just going up and up and up. So like,
Yep.
Look and see how much those are, because that also is other things that factor in that, like, we don't have Prime, we don't have, direct shipping, and we don't have that kind of setup
Yeah.
in Canada. So, it's definitely, again, another hit to Canadian salons, why they need to really look at their cost of goods and make sure they have tracking systems and software to help make sure that it's covered.
That's such a good point, because it's so easy to think like those costs, like $200, $300 a month, we'll break it up towards like however many services we do, like we'll just mix it in there. And if you charge high enough, that covers those things. But those things really add up. And you've said something before on a podcast too. It's like little holes will sink a great ship. And that's exactly right. When a cost is small enough compared to like revenue, you're like, oh, I don't care, whatever. Like it's easy to just kind of like not worry about this thing. Gloves, foils, like all those supplies that you use too. It's easy to just think of those as like little dollar charges here and there. But again, going back to like having a thin profit margin, it's like, no, those are actually really making a big difference when you add all those up, even shipping. And yeah, exactly your point. Like shipping, I get Canada Post emails regularly, and it's like, we're raising our prices again. It's like every couple months, it's like, oh my God, like it's already so much money to ship here, and there's just no end in sight. And so for me, when I get anxiety about like the rising costs and just being like no end in sight, the only thing that kind of calms me down is like, okay, this is my plan. And so this is me like knowing all of my costs, like what I need to make, what I need to do, and like very, very meticulously knowing it and making sure that those are covered. So that would be like everything goes back to parts of labor, but truly, it's just like that is the most black and white, easy way to do it. Know what you cost and make sure that that's paid for by the time that client walks out of all those costs for that specific client, because it looks different for every single client, and make sure that is covered, because when that is covered, then you have profit. Once your bills are paid, once the expenses are paid for that specific client, you're going to profit on the service.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And it's the simplest way to see that in real time. Like it's important to kind of look at that. And I remember actually we're going to have a podcast episode with a good old salon owner, Celine Dupuis. She was one of the first people that use Salon Scale. And so when, talking about these things, and she's from Saskatoon as well, a lot of it was, how do we expose this without, getting people questioning, or like, how do we do that? And so working with her and going through that, we got to see live and real action between her salon, my salon, and a couple others, exactly the benefit for Canadian-based salons that use a system to track, separate, and charge. Mm-hmm. And from there, that example, a lot of the salons, we've seen them increase their revenue by like $100,000. And our dear friends at High Performance Salon Academy, watching, Celine go ahead and help educate and bring this into the community, that's where we saw a lot of the transition and a lot of the growth. So I think, when we look at that, Canada salons, Canadian salons, when we look at, improving the profitability of salons, we've seen it work. We've seen it happen. And then watching a Canadian salon owner take this into the US and then help kind of pass that message on, mm-hmm. and see the significant success there in the US, like that was life-changing, and that allowed us to know that like we are making an impact, and we want to help our fellow Canadians, but we are on a mission here to put profits back in salons, and that's where the heart comes from.
And I would say one thing that we thought it was important to do a few months ago was to introduce Canadian pricing for Salon Scale.
Yeah.
Because again, like we talked about, like the dollar just fluctuates. Previously we were just thought it, we had a model where it was in USD. Made it easier for us as a business. But we were willing to kind of take that hit as a business and introduce Canadian pricing just to be able to make it more affordable. We made it kind of 1-to-1 with the US US dollar. So it was a big
Yeah. Well,
discount for Canadians, I would say, and just to be able to again make it more accessible so we can help solve that issue for our hometown salons here too.
you know, that's reality is we were built and born in this country, and we love our Canadians, and we'll support them in any way. And throughout all those changes through COVID and the expenses and the, you know, inflation, the conversions, like all of these things kind of happening, we knew we can make a difference and help. And so the one thing that we did when we did convert and make sure that we are charging Canadians Canadian funds, you know, that allowed them to make sure that it was also transparent and true. When they would subscribe prior and then it would convert, it was quite a bit of a jump. And so we wanted to kind of go the extra mile and kind of do that, especially, you know, from a Canadian, for Canadians. How many more times can I say Canadian? But, you know, in all honesty, I think this whole episode is really all about, you know, what is really the benefit of using Salon Scale as a Canadian salon owner, and, you know, why you should start now. And I think the reality is it's never going to stop, right? So inflation's never going to stop. The products are not going to, you know, decrease. It's likely you're going to attract and acquire products internationally, maybe not even US-based products. You might be even going more international to create a new brand value in the country. And so I think it's critical. It's critical to separate these things, to save yourself on taxes, save yourself on any rising costs, and to get rid of that kind of feeling of not being sure if you're making profit or not. And so I would say that this is all for our Canadian salons, and we're looking forward to serving each and every one of you.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a good place to wrap up for today. So thank you all so much for tuning in.
And if you are interested, you're listening to this and you want to go head over to our website, salonscale.com, and start a free 14-day trial.
That's right. Thanks again.